So we're here to talk about reading code under the influence of one's emotions. Thank you for coming. If you're here, you are interested in the subject, right? So who here writes code in your daily life? Okay, almost everyone. That's good. Who here reads code? Okay. And there's something I found quite interesting when that the reason why I started doing this talk at all, right, reading, is that I find a rich literature about how to write good code. It's very frequent. You have many books about this. It's a very frequent subject. How writing clean code, writing good code, etc., etc., etc. But I still haven't found anything about how to read code. That's surprising, right? Because we spend a huge amount of time reading code, but the subject is not sexy. And yet, how many of you think that you spend more time reading code than writing code? Yeah, right. Almost all. That's the problem. That's the issue. In order to write any code, you have to spend much more time in reading code than you spend writing code. In legacy code base, which is most of you, right? You mostly don't start with the blank page. Yeah? You must have something already, and you have to spend time reading that something to write anything. And when you write it, the code you just write, it is way more read than is written again, than is changed, than is modified. We spend a lot of time talking about how can I write code to be better read, I write code that people can read. And that's good. You should do that. But we do not spend any time at all speaking on how can we improve ourselves into reading code. Empathy is so difficult a skill for developers that we don't want to talk about understanding others. And I find this quite interesting. That's why I started this talk. Actually, this talk has a hidden agenda, which is I want you to write about reading code. I want to convince you that your experiences about how you read code are valuable and they should be shared. I will share with you mine, and I hope that you will understand that some things I do today maybe you are not doing and you should. And then I hope by then that you should get encouraged to share yourself in your talks, in your blog posts, in your books, that you should share yourselves what you use today as techniques to read code. Because I'm convinced we have a rich tapestry of techniques that are just not shared because the subject is not considered sexy. I want to make reading sexy again. Okay? So, there is reading, and there's under the influence of emotions. I will go back to reading soon, right? But I'll get to the emotional part right now. Who here has? Almost everyone raised their hand when I asked if you ever read code. So who here, when read code, have any emotions? Okay, and what are those emotions usually? Sorry? Okay, so we have surprise. What else? Anger. What else?
Fear.
Fear. Fearless chewing, okay. Has? Madness. Despair. Or as Sartre said, hell is other people. Right? So I do this talk a lot, and sometimes I get people with positive emotions. That happens. That people say, oh, I'm stricken by the beauty, right? This is not something that happens a lot, but I hope some of you are just censoring yourselves. So there are positive and negative emotions, and people tend to pay attention a lot more to the negative emotions, so they need to be more frequent. I'm not doing a statistical examination of this right now. But this comes a lot. Yes? So I thought it was quite important to think that a lot of the time we spend when reading code is spent coping. Yep. You start reading that code, and there is a lot of time spent in archaeology, and a lot of time spent coping. Just getting into your hands, oh my God, what this person did, why? Yes? Does that ring a bell to you? Okay, so what I wanted to share is my own coping mechanisms. I'm not saying that they should be or will be absolutely valid to you or valuable to you. My whole point here is for you to share yours, yes? So I'm sharing mine with you. And if they are useful to you, that's good. If they are not, then I want you to share yours. Yes? So there's something I repeat to myself a lot when I'm reading code and I'm taken by those negative emotions myself. It works for me. It works in my machine. I remember of Hollands razor. It is not enough, but, oh yeah, this presentation will contain typos. I remember a lot of Hollands razor. Do you know about Hollands razor? Okay. It was popularized by Highland. So you usually find it by Hollands or Highland. Not really important. Never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. Now, this one people usually do. Usually don't have much problems with malice. Usually, well, it's very rare that I see a person frustrated with this code and they say, this is sabotage. This person here is just trying to kill me, okay? Or just trying to destroy the business. Usually don't think that. Usually just look at the code and they think, they are stupid. This was a stupid person, yes? That's more frequent. So usually the Hollands razor holds. What I do myself is I extend the Hollands razor. I extend the Hollands razor. I do several other steps on this. So I start with malice, not attributed to stupidity. Then I go to stupidity to ignorance. So this one is more difficult, right? It's very easy to look at the code and say, this is stupid, instead of saying, this person lacked some knowledge. But you still do that a lot. At each step of this ladder we are doing here, I just switch in something that is possible to something that is more probable. Yes? And I just try to put myself in the shoes of others. It is an exercise of empathy, because I could just say it here, well, you just have to have more empathy when you read code, right? Yeah, it's done. Let's go grab a beer. No. So this would not be very useful. So I try to share with you what works for me into the grind of it when I'm in front of the code. Yes? When I'm suffering the code myself. I try to remember, okay, can I explain this by ignorance? And it takes some time. It takes some effort to go there, even if it seems obvious. And now, in retrospect, when I'm talking with you here in this room, this is just obvious, Romeu, right? But when you have those feelings in front of the code, it's not so obvious anymore. So I keep the list, and I try to go from step to step in the ladder myself, and it works for me. So I try to say is ignorance. Ignorance happens. Each one of you was already ignorant about something in his job someday, right? You can relate to that. You're not perfect. I mean, you're just a bunch of apes. I'm too, right? And and there are things you don't know. This is an acceptable thing, to not know things. And you may think that it's insulting that the person did not know a pattern that you found that was obvious and important in this context. But there are things they don't know. And it's a different level of feeling saying this person is stupid versus saying this person did not know this thing. Yeah? Okay. So I usually go from ignorance to lack of attention. I just going a degrade, just going back a series of different judgments and changing my perspective of the other when reading his code or her code. Yes? So I go from myself, I go from ignorance to lack of attention. Attention is a very finite thing. It is a very flattening thing. You have a finite amount of attention you can spend in a day. And your ape brain keeps convincing you that you have more than you have. This is true to every one of you, and true for me too, especially for me. And your brain keeps pushing you to believe that you have more attention than you have. The most astounding superpower would be infinite attention. We don't have that. But your brain keeps trying to convince you that you have the superpower. At some point, your attention will fail. Maybe this happens because you're not motivated. Maybe this happens because you're sad. Maybe this happens because you have problems. Maybe this happens because you're tired. Maybe this happens because you have spent all your attention elsewhere there, or most of your attention elsewhere there. And it's not a fixed thing. It's not like money. It's not something that you have a lot and you can always spend in one place. If you're stupid. No, it's something that goes in waves. Your attention for the day decreases when you spend it, but you cannot spend it flatly. The amount you can spend oscillates. Yes? That's true for you, and that's true for everyone around you. It's actually one of the things I found most astonished when doing pair programming or mob programming, is that watch people, the pair producing more because just one of them is having the peak of attention and the other is going low in that attention there. Well, when you are more attentive to the code you are doing, you do better code. No shit. So maybe the person was not stupid, was not malicious, was not ignorant. Maybe the person just did not pay attention to the specific details in front of it have at a specific moment. Yes? Well, my feelings have just changed if I can convince myself of that. I just talk about coping. I will talk about reading just afterwards. We're doing this in cycles. Well, if I get to convince myself that maybe it was lack of attention, then I can convince myself to go from lack of attention to unstated context. Now, friends, who here has ever, in the past, written code that you regretted? Okay. Keep your hands up if that code stayed in production afterwards. Okay. So, there was a reason for that, right? It was not lack of attention. It was not, when you did that, it was not lack of attention. It was not ignorance. It was not stupidity. And it was not malice. It was probably not even a mistake. You just have a specific context, like a situation of pressure that pushed you to do this, right? Yes? Well, guess what? This does happen to other people too. It actually happens a lot. And I actually had this a lot with when I started doing, started being a senior engineer and tried to build up my junior engineers with me some decades ago. I'm old, that's awful. And I'm not as old as you, Linda, okay. But I'm a fan. And the thing is, when I started doing this, I have this junior engineer that got in the code base that I have written, and it has this pattern of behavior every day for months. He just came, look at the code and say, "This is awful." I was like, okay, it was code I wrote. Okay, what is awful? Explain to me. And he started explaining his situation. I started explaining why I built the code like that. And around an hour or so of discussion, I have this moment of enlightenment in his head. I said, "Oh, I would have done the same thing." And I said, "Yes." And we moved on, right? And he was happy. He learned something. And I was happy. He understood me. And then the next day, we would go, "This is awful." And we started this behavior, this way of discussion again and again and again for months. And word of advice, you have completely right to be a newbie and have this kind of behavior, and it's good to have people that will help you getting out of this. But it will be way easier for you not to hurt everyone of your life if you're not going, "This is awful," every day. So, this is all very beautiful, but my last later is when I go from unstated context, and I'm not perfect, I'm not able to do this every day, I fail at this a lot, to the systemics. So, who here have ever heard about systemics? Oh, so there is something very important. You should check a book called Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows. Not Bonella, Donella. Yes, this book, right? You really, 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 really should check this book. Actually, there is probably nothing more important that could do right now, even watching this talk, than reading this book. It's perfectly fine to get out right now and read this book. So, I cannot possibly explain system thinking and systemics for you in 10 minutes or something like this. This is not doable for me. Maybe there are people that can do that, but not me. And the poor thing I can say, but this is really not enough to an audience that have never seen systemics, is always read this book. And yes?
When do you find the time to read a book?
When I find, this we'll get in the reading part. But I'll note it, so I don't forget that, okay? I'll note this right now here. When do you find time to read, right? Okay. So, I'll go back to systemics, and then I'll go back to that. So, you exist in a system. A system is a series of entities and relations between them. This is very gross, a definition, but I'm trying to do this quick, okay? So anybody that really knows systemics here, yes, this is all full definition. Let's go with the flow. So every group of people you were working with have a behavior of the system itself, of the group itself, and that behavior have consequences. This seems very abstract. I'll try to give an example. I used to have a client where the team asked me, oh, Romeu, we have a problem. We have too many bugs. We crumble in the bugs. We cannot do anything. The bugs just keep coming and coming and coming. I say, oh, wow, that's awful. And your production is always coming with bug reports over bug reports and bug reports. They say, no, the production is fine. Okay, and so what's happening? Well, the QA people, the quality assurance people, they keep always finding new problems and giving to us. And they say, well, we're paying them for that, so that's good. Shows they're working. And they say, yeah, but then we try to produce, and they keep inputting, and we crumble on the weight of all that, okay? And show me, how do we work it? Well, we do a sprint, right? We work for 2 weeks, and then we deliver to them, so it's finished. Then we start another sprint. And while we're doing this other sprint, the QA people are working, and they keep pushing back bugs to us. Do you see the system at work here? Are you starting to see this? You have a machine here, a team of devs, doing development. They finish working. When they give to QA, right? And they start working a new set of features. And QA at this point starts working into this, and it starts giving back to the developers bug reports. And the developers say, well, we finished all this, and then we started all this, and now we cannot go in this because this keeps coming, the first sprint keeps coming back into the second. Now we have a problem, we have too many bugs. What we have is a system that can only create bugs. That was designed to do so. If you look at the behavior of the system, there is no other, if you look at how they designed the system, there is no other behavior possible than creating bug reports. Yes? Do you see that? Yes? This is a very gross and quick and rough introduction to what systemics is. It's trying to look those behaviors from the outside and seeing what is the behavior of the machine. Individually, none of those people wanted that. But when you look from the outside and see the mechanics of how they interact, those mechanics produce this behavior, yes? Well, what I'm trying to tell you is that we have a lot of systemic problems into software engineering. Many. And if you go back, when I asked you back before, if you ever produced code that you regretted and if you went to production, I'm probably sure that many of you have done that several times. And usually we will say things like, well, we needed to push to production. We had a deadline, right? or things like that. I'm not saying it would be the case to each one of you, but things like that. And when you would look at the pressure points you have over software, you end up with a system that end up pushing a lot of bad ideas into software and try to push bad shitty code that is created by the interaction you have with all the people that are not the devs themselves, which is the fault of the devs and the fault of the other people, but the systems between those people generates bad code. Does it make sense to you? I have a workshop where I do only that. I do this a lot. I have done this workshop in, not here, sorry, in Kandinsky, recently Berlin, and we'll do it again in France, in Bordeaux at the end of the year. I have done it, have like 680 devs have done this workshop up until now. And all I do in this workshop is the kebab kata. All I do in the workshop is that I play the role of a client, and I reproduce behaviors I see commonly in clients, and we try to produce code together, and I only give to my developers a single unique requirement in the beginning. They should not produce code they regret. I have 680 people that have done this workshop up until now, several times, and all of them have regretted their code. And I just reproduce like 30 behaviors. I have you can find in my GitHub, the facilitator's guide to this workshop, where I explain each one of the behaviors, etc., etc. Here, oh, it was that. You have the facilitator's guide where you have each behavior, etc., etc., etc. You can just fetch that if you want. And I just do these behaviors, and everyone creates bad code they regret instantly, right? You do not own your code as much as you think you own your code. You are responsible for it. This not absolves you from the guilt. But you are not the only part writing the code. There is a system at hand. It is naive to think that the person that wrote the code was immune to the system. And if you accept that, then you start hating your coworkers less, and you start hating your company culture more. Which gets to this quote I put on Twitter. This whole presentation is here because I wanted to change this. I don't know if you can read that, because I have problems increasing the size. I don't know why. Usually it works, and oh, yeah, why not? So I cannot weaponize you to change a culture like this, right? But it starts out by seeing the effects on that culture over software. Okay? Software that is done, I mean, have you ever been in a group of software developers that were working on the assumption of constant artificial deadline pressure? Yes? Yes, right? This is not a system that can produce good software, or that usually produce good software. Maybe it's possible, but I never have seen it done. So let's talk about reading. I don't know how much time I have left. I will just go with the flow, and when people drag me out, I'll drag me out. So what is strange about reading is that you all believe that you have mastered it. I'm unsettled by that. There was another dude that was unsettled by that, was Mortimer Adler. He wrote a book, a magnificent book. You should read that book too. I'll talk about having time to read right now. But it was a magnificent book called How to Read a Book. And seriously, you should read this book. Mortimer Adler, he came to the same conclusion I came right now. I actually just copying his conclusion to software, really, because he did this decades ago, right? He came to the conclusion that people assume they mastered reading books. Assume that the level of reading you have at the end of your, when you are 7 years old, at the end of your studies, right, is enough. People just assume that's good and stop at that, right? It's like they don't believe that reading is a skill that you could improve upon all your life. But why not? Why could you not become better readers over time, all our life? And as soon as you get over the level of learning just the basics of elementary reading, all the literature you keep getting upon how to read better is just reading faster. It's just people that want you to read faster. Not to read better, just read faster. Right? Because when you think that reading is just a chore you do to be able to put knowledge inside your head, then the only optimization is reducing the cost of that. When you see reading as a cost, the only optimization you can do is reduce cost. As the same way that when you see computer science, when a company seeks computer science as a cost, we see that from IT department as a cost, the only improvement that can be done is to make it cheaper. Right? If you see it as a way to bring, if you see IT as a way to bring more value, then there are several other things that you can do with IT. But if you only see it as a cost of doing business, then the only improvement you can do is making it cheaper. It's the same with reading. People assume that reading is just the cost to getting knowledge. And so the only improvement you can have on reading is making it faster, making it cheaper, reading more in less time. And that fundamental error we do to software too, when reading software. And that's my point here today with you people. Let's find other ways of reading. So Mortimer Adler, you should read this book, but Mortimer Adler talks about different levels of reading. I'll talk with about 4 of them. Those 4 levels of reading are true for books, and they will be true also for code. Who here has ever read all your code base, every line of it? Right? Nobody raised the, oh yeah. So I have my first ever person to raise his hand. It's a very small code base, right? Okay, fair. You can do this for microservices or too. But the thing is, usually in your legacy code base, you don't. You don't read all your code base. You don't know everything about your code base. Yeah? You don't know everything about code speed. You also don't know all your business rules. You just have to, when you are in this line of work, you just have to get used with your ignorance, right? Like I said here, yeah? So, Mortimer will talk about this of indexing levels of reading. When you index, you don't try to read the book. You just take the book and try to get the overall idea of what is the structure of the book, what is the outline. You just go through it very quickly, just looking at some points. It's not even skimming, just trying to look at the structure, just looking at the index, just looking at the structure of chapters, just looking, okay, if I wanted to have this knowledge, where would I go in the book itself? Yes? And some books, you may stop at the level and just throw them. Getting to throw books is a very difficult thing. People have this sunk cost fallacy. I have already paid for the book, and I don't think like throwing the book away. I think that's awful. And I have already spent some minutes indexing it, so I might as well just read completely right now, right? Well, you don't do that to your code base, do you? Indexing is very important, and is even more important in code. That's where I usually, myself, and this is myself, this whole talk is just me sharing what I use to read code to you, in hopes that you share what you use to read code to me, okay? And myself, to index, I use a whole lot of GraphViz. And I'm old and sad and and things like that, and cut and grep. I just take slices of code and create graphs of dependencies. Well, there's tools that do that already, you know, IDE, right? But graphs of dependencies, graph of where this is used. When I try to write code and I try to get from point of point in my code, I usually create Ariadne's thread. Do you know this? Yes. I keep drawing. When I read code, I usually read code with a paper sheet by me. And I keep drawing where I have been. I note the places where I have been. You can have this easily with your IDE, just jumping back and forth, right? But you don't have the visual of what was the whole path. So I just do this in a paper. What was the whole path? Where have I been? And this helps me a lot to understand what I'm doing. Well, it helps me. Don't know you. But it helps me get a big picture of what was my path. Am I going in circles? How deep am I going in the rabbit hole? All those things becomes very visual when you start doing this. Yes? I don't know how people do, but I very rarely see people writing when they read code. So, indexing gets you an idea of where things are. Skimming, if we take Mortimer Adler's idea of skimming, is just you read a book and if you don't understand something, you just keep reading. You read very quickly a book. And if several things you don't understand, you just don't understand them. You don't care about that, you just keep going. If you think that the piling up of things you did not understood is starting to get too expensive, you just stop it. Yes? And And hence, you can take a very complex book and just skim things on it in some minutes. It doesn't give the whole value of the book, but now you get more of the content that you got when you did your indexing, yes? The whole idea here from Martin and other is that you go from one level of lecture to another. First you try indexing, then you try skimming, then you, instead of try to read my book from beginning to end in a serialized motion, I accept to read it 3-4 times in different ways. And this seems awful in the beginning. In the beginning, when you switch from I will read in a serial manner to I will read several times, but in different ways, you think that you're wasting time. It seems that you're wasting time. It feels like wasting time. That's the whole problem with the difference between speed and the feeling of speed. And that's a leitmotif of our whole industry. When you are in an airplane, you are going very fast, but you don't feel fast. Right? When you are in a go-kart, you are not as fast as you are in an airplane, but you feel fast. Yes? The feeling of speed and speed itself are two very different things. And to achieve speed, you have to divorce yourself from the feeling of speed. And that's a very hard thing to do to our ape brains. So that's why, for example, in TDD, the separation of make it work, make it right, make it fast is so genius. You are writing a program 3 times. It should be slower than writing it once, right? Should be. It feels slower, but it's actually faster. Why is faster? Because you're now just separating different responsibilities of what you're doing and going inside them. Make it work, then make it right is faster than just try to make both at once. Because when you try to make code work and write in the same writing session, what you are doing is you go from one to the other in your head. You don't really realize it always, but some part of you is going, oh yeah, I'm not finished the task yet. And another part of you is going, oh, this don't feel right. And those both parts start fighting for your time and attention. And time and attention are limited resources. Yes?
Concurrence versus parallelism, basically.
Yes, that's concurrence versus parallelism. And the thing is, at the same way that it feels awkward to separate writing in 3 different kinds of writing and write 3 times and accept that I will be faster doing this over time, not in the beginning, not when I'm learning, but I will be faster doing this. I'll be more productive doing this than just trying to write it all at once. Separating reading in 4 types of reading will make your reading more effective, will make you read better, will make it read faster, will make you read stronger. And it feels awkward and strange in the beginning. So if you index, then you skim, then you go analytical reading. Over time, you do this better than just trying to read how you're doing today, supposing you're not doing the separation. Analytical reading is the reading you get at the elementary level. You just try to read sequentially, trying to understand everything, and not really progressing before you understood things. You're analyzing everything you read. And it works quite well for pleasure reading, and works quite well, and it will be faster if you're already indexed and already skimmed a book. But whatever you read in a book or reading code, if you only do analytical reading every time, it will be more expensive. It will take a lot of time trying to read all this code. And some books, you just do this and you throw. Some books will do this and you throw it away. And some books you do all three. And some books will deserve go all the way to semiological reading. In semiological reading, you read a book and you read several other books on the same topics and you try to compare them between them to arrive at conclusions. It means reading again and again and again. And it's the same thing to code. Some code places will only deserve an indexing. Some parts of our code base will deserve for you to skim them a little bit when you read. Some parts of your code base will deserve that you take the time to analyze what they are doing and why, how. And some code parts will really, if they are really read a lot, if several people are reading them a lot, will deserve the time you take to compare them between them, to try to find common analogies, to try to find common points, to try to understand your domain better just by reading them. And this takes some semiological reasoning. Well, I say you, but I'm really talking about me here. This is all just me talking about myself, right? So how do you find time to read? Myself, I throw books a lot. There are many books I just skim. Many books I just index. Many. And usually if a book, I don't think I'm getting value from the book in like less than an hour, I'm not giving attention to the book again. And this happens a lot, like hundreds of times in a year. And those that get, yes?
What kind of book are they? Why you don't evaluate them?
Oh, it can happen to any book, right? If it's a romance and I just don't feel enthralled by it, it's not valuable to me. Maybe valuable to someone else.
Why do you even consider it?
Oh,
Why buying it?
it happens a lot for me to see a book and say, wow, it seems interesting, and when I start reading it, it doesn't seem that interesting anymore. For example, The Capital by Marx seems a very interesting book, but I got bored by it myself.
Did you read it all?
I started, and I never finished. Sorry?
What's the yearly book budget?
Oh, we don't talk about this here. So thing is, my whole point is here is software, right? Because for books you can read more team or other, but in software, we get a harder deal. You are paid to read the software. I mean, probably there are some people paid to read books. I'm not trying to judge this. And the thing is, what I do myself is that I spend a huge amount of time indexing my software, just trying to understand the structure of it, try to make drawings of it, try to generate those drawings of it, try to create code that will help me read code. Because I find this to be valuable. I found the big picture view I have of a huge code base is a valuable thing. Because all you do is generate a graph of dependencies and you have thousands of classes in this huge legacy code base that is 12 years old. I'm not talking about the experience of any of you, right? Nobody here has seen that, right? Well, you just have a mess, a visual mess. That doesn't help you. So the huge part of my day is indexing. Is try to create a coherent view of my code. I say that I do graph viz a lot, and I don't know, have you ever done graph viz? Okay, you should. You go spend some time playing with this. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's pretty neat. Okay? Allows you to write text things that becomes pictures of schematics. It's good. I mean, It saves me a whole much of a lifetime of time.
Have you tried one map email?
Yes, okay. I don't do UML a lot. Yes, plenty UML works. Right. I'm not dissing on UML. I just don't do it a lot. What I usually do is that I do informal drawings of what I see that are valuable to me at a short time frame, and then I throwable. I don't try to create lasting documentation when I'm just exploring code. I think lasting documentation has a value. It's just that I write a lot of marginalia, a lot of metadata, a lot of field notes of my archaeology in code. And those field notes, make it them reusable would be a job in itself, and I don't always do it. At least that works for me. Sometimes I get a way of doing it in the lasting way, but mostly my fieldwork notes, they help me over time, they help me currently, but they're not things I am communicating a lot unless I'm doing pair programming or more programming. Yes? When I'm doing pair programming or more programming, what I think I do a lot, is I do a drawing of my decisions. I just take every debate we have, and I do a drawing of several different options, the several different options of the debate. We vote, and we go down to that, and we get at the end of the day all the different debates we had, and we are now mapping our way of working more than the code itself. This also had value to me, to read the code, read how we are doing reading the code. But it's a meta level of reasoning. Yes? So, to wrap up, I don't know how much time you have at all. How much time do I have? Oh, damn it. To wrap up, we talked about coping mechanisms, at least my coping mechanisms. We talked about tooling ourselves to index, to skim, to analyze. And we talked about and we talked about the interactions between those. And we talked about systemics. And I heartily encourage you to read Mortimer Adler's book and Don Alamido's book. You should. You should find the time to read those two. You should decide for yourself in which ways you should read it, but it works at least in indexing.
Have you tried semiologic?
I have tried semiologic with both. And I failed to do semiological with Mortimer Adler because it's very difficult to find good books on reading books. But I have done so with Don Alamido's. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I had one question here, was how to help others read your code easier. This is really not the subject of the talk, right? Because the whole point here was you reading others and helping yourself read others. But there's a whole literature on how to write readable software. I'm quite fond of a little less known book called Domain-Driven Design by Eric Evans. It's a good one. It is a very hard book to read. Evans is a genius. I love Evans, but he's not the he's slow to read. Let's stop at that. Like it's 800 pages and it's tiring. I read, but it's a very good idea of how to do readable software.
There's a newer version of one Diamond. It's much easier to read, I would say.
Maybe. I have not read yet the distilled DDD by the Romeu, the green book. I'm sorry,
Not
Ron.
one, but the previous one.
Oh, okay.
The red one.
There is also all the literature by Martin Fowler and all the literature by all those other people. Writing readable code is a thing that we have a lot of literature over. It's not as finished as a problem. We still have a lot of ways to go into writing readable code, and this is one of the main challenges of our industry. And DDD for me is, I think, the right direction in my opinion. But, sorry? And clean code? Well, but I think it's a thing in the right direction. But reading code is something we do not write enough about, and you should. Please, do write about reading code. Thank you.
Thank you.